The iconic blue and white set of The Ellen DeGeneres Show gleamed under the studio lights as the audience settled in for what was expected to be another light-hearted afternoon of celebrity interviews and feel-good moments. It was October 2019, and Ellen was riding high on the success of her daytime empire, known for her signature dance moves, generous giveaways, and ability to make even the most serious celebrities seem approachable and fun. Today's guest was Ozzy Osbourne, the 70-year-old Prince of Darkness, who was appearing to promote his latest album and discuss his recent Parkinson's disease diagnosis. Ellen DeGeneres, dressed in her usual casual chic style of designer jeans and a blazer, bounced onto the stage with her characteristic energy, greeting the enthusiastic audience before settling into her chair across from Ozzy. The rock legend looked distinguished in a well-tailored black suit, his famous cross necklace visible beneath his open collar, and despite the tremor in his hands from Parkinson's, his eyes were bright and alert. "Welcome back to the show, Ozzy," Ellen began with her trademark megawatt smile. "It's always so great to have you here. You look fantastic, by the way. How are you feeling? If you're enjoying this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. It helps us bring you more amazing moments from daytime television." "I'm doing well. Thank you, Ellen," Ozzy replied in his distinctive Birmingham accent. "Some days are better than others with the Parkinson's, but I'm grateful for each day I get to wake up and spend time with my family." "That's such a beautiful attitude," Ellen said, her tone warm and genuine. "You've been so open about your health struggles, and I think that takes real courage. Speaking of which, I know you've also been very open about your journey with sobriety and how that's connected to your spiritual beliefs. Can you tell us about that?" Ozzy's expression became more serious, the casual interview atmosphere shifting slightly as he prepared to discuss something deeply personal. "Well, Ellen, getting sober 15 years ago was the most important thing I've ever done, and I couldn't have done it without faith. I mean, I tried everything else, willpower, therapy, medication, but nothing worked until I admitted I needed help from something bigger than myself." "That's wonderful," Ellen nodded, though her smile seemed a bit forced. "And by something bigger, you mean God," Ozzy said simply. "I know that might surprise people, given my reputation and all, but my faith has been the cornerstone of my recovery. I pray every day, I read scripture, and I try to live according to Christian principles as best I can." The audience murmured appreciatively, clearly moved by his honesty. But Ellen's expression had subtly changed, her smile becoming more strained. "Right, well, that's great for you," she said, her tone taking on a slightly dismissive quality. "I mean, whatever works, right? Some people need that kind of structure." Ozzy's eyebrows rose slightly at the word structure, sensing something condescending in Ellen's tone, but he continued graciously. "It's more than structure, Ellen. It's about recognizing that there's meaning and purpose beyond just our own desires and impulses. For me, believing that there's a loving God who forgives mistakes and offers second chances. That's what gave me the strength to change my life." Ellen let out a small laugh that sounded more nervous than amused. "I have to say, Ozzy, it's just so interesting to hear you talking about God and Scripture when, you're literally called the Prince of Darkness. Isn't that a little contradictory?" The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension building between host and guest. "Not at all," Ozzy replied calmly. "The Prince of Darkness was always a stage persona, a character I played in my music, but my real life, my actual beliefs and values, those are separate from the entertainment." "But come on," Ellen said, her laugh becoming more pronounced and skeptical. "You bit the head off a bat. You've sung songs about devils and darkness for decades, and now you're telling me you're a devout Christian. Doesn't that seem a little convenient? Like maybe you're just hedging your bets as you get older?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and the studio audience fell completely silent. This was not the warm, supportive interview they had expected from Ellen's show. Ozzy sat quietly for a moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of steel. "Ellen, can I ask you something?" "Sure," she replied, though her confidence seemed to be wavering slightly. "Have you ever been so lost, so completely broken, that you thought about ending your own life?" The directness of the question caught Ellen off guard. Well, I mean, everyone has difficult times. That's not what I asked, Ozzy said gently but firmly. I asked if you've ever been so hopeless that you seriously considered suicide as your only option. Ellen's smile faltered completely. Ozzy, I don't think we need to go to such dark places. I do, Ozzy interrupted, his voice growing stronger. Because that's where I was 20 years ago. Completely hopeless, completely alone, convinced that the world would be better off without me in it. The studio was now completely silent, the usual energy of the show replaced by something much more serious and raw. I had tried everything, Ellen. Rehab, therapy, medication, willpower. Nothing worked. I kept relapsing, kept hurting the people I loved, kept destroying everything good in my life. I felt like a monster who didn't deserve forgiveness or love. Ellen looked increasingly uncomfortable, clearly wanting to steer the conversation back to lighter territory. But Ozzy wasn't finished. And then, in my darkest moment, someone told me about the possibility of grace, about a God who loves even broken people, who offers forgiveness even to those who think they're beyond redemption, about the idea that no matter how far you've fallen, there's always a way back. His voice was growing more passionate now, but remained controlled and articulate. That message saved my life, Ellen. Not metaphorically, literally. It gave me hope when I had none, strength when I was weak, and a reason to keep fighting when I wanted to give up. Ellen tried to interject. Well, I'm glad you found something that worked for you, but surely you can understand why people might find it hard to take seriously when… When what? Ozzy asked sharply. When it comes from someone who made mistakes? When it comes from someone who lived in darkness for a while? When it comes from someone who doesn't look like your typical churchgoer? The challenge in his voice was unmistakable now. Let me tell you something about faith, Ellen. It's not about being perfect. It's not about having your life together before you're allowed to believe. It's about recognizing that you need help, that you can't do it alone, and that there's something bigger than yourself that cares about whether you succeed or fail. Ellen's earlier dismissive attitude was completely gone now, replaced by visible discomfort as she realized her guest was not going to let her casual mockery slide. But surely you can see why people might think, she began weakly. Why they might think what? Ozzy interrupted. That someone who's made mistakes can't genuinely change. That someone who's lived through darkness can't find light. That redemption is only available to people who never needed it in the first place. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes intense with conviction. You know what I think the real problem is, Ellen? I think it makes some people uncomfortable to see genuine transformation because it challenges their assumptions about human nature. It's easier to believe that people can't really change than to accept that maybe you've been wrong about what's possible. The audience was transfixed, many leaning forward in their seats as they watched this extraordinary confrontation unfold. And let me address this idea that my faith is somehow convenient because I'm getting older, Ozzy continued, his voice rising slightly. I've been sober for 15 years. I've been talking about my faith publicly for over a decade. I've donated millions of dollars to charities, worked with addiction recovery programs, and tried to use my platform to help people who are struggling with the same issues I faced. Ellen opened her mouth to respond, but Ozzy wasn't finished. If this is convenience, it's the most inconvenient convenience I've ever experienced. Do you know how much easier it would have been to just keep living the wild rock star lifestyle? Do you know how much more popular it would have been to keep playing the Prince of Darkness character instead of talking about prayer and forgiveness? His voice grew more intense, but remained controlled. But I chose the harder path because it was the right path. I chose honesty over image, substance over style, truth over entertainment. And now you're sitting here laughing at that choice, dismissing it as some kind of publicity stunt. Ellen looked genuinely shocked by the passion and articulateness of his response. Ozzy, I wasn't trying to… Yes, you were, he said firmly, but not unkindly. You were trying to make my faith into a punchline. You were treating my spiritual journey as some kind of amusing contradiction instead of recognizing it for what it actually is, the most important and authentic thing in my life. The studio remained completely silent as Ozzy's words hung in the air. Let me ask you something, Ellen, he continued, his voice softening slightly. What gives your life meaning? What gets you up in the morning? What sustains you when things get difficult? Ellen seemed genuinely flustered by the question. I try to make people happy, to spread joy. That's beautiful, Ozzy said sincerely. And I respect that. But can you respect that for me? Faith serves that same purpose. That believing in God's love and forgiveness is what allows me to love and forgive others. That my relationship with the divine is what enables me to be a better husband, father, and human being. Ellen was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing not just his words, but the depth of conviction behind them. Yes, I can respect that, she said quietly, her earlier dismissiveness completely gone. Thank you, Ozzy replied graciously, because that's all I was asking for. Not agreement, just respect. You don't have to share my beliefs, but you could acknowledge that they're genuine and meaningful to me. You're right, Ellen admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I was being dismissive, and that wasn't fair to you or to your journey. We all make mistakes, Ellen, Ozzy said gently. The important thing is being willing to learn from them and do better next time. The audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then with growing intensity, as they recognized the grace Ozzy had shown in the face of mockery. Can I ask you something? Ellen said, her tone now completely different from earlier in the interview. Of course. How do you maintain that faith when you're dealing with something like Parkinson's? Doesn't it ever make you angry, or question whether God really cares? Ozzy considered the question seriously. Oh, I definitely have days when I'm angry or frustrated. I'm human. But my faith doesn't promise that life will be easy. It promises that I won't have to face the difficulties alone. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The Parkinson's is challenging, there's no doubt about that. But it's also taught me things about patience, about accepting help from others, about appreciating the simple moments with my family. Would I choose to have it? No. But can I find meaning and purpose even with it? Absolutely. Ellen was visibly moved by his response. That's really profound. I'm sorry for how I approached this topic earlier. I think I let my own assumptions get in the way of really listening to what you were sharing. Apology accepted, Ozzy said warmly. And I appreciate you being willing to have this conversation, even when it got uncomfortable. That takes courage. The remainder of the interview proceeded in a completely different atmosphere. Ellen asked thoughtful questions about how faith had changed his relationships with his family, how it influenced his music, and what advice he would give to others struggling with addiction or life challenges. One thing I want people to understand, Ozzy said as the interview wound down, is that faith isn't about having all the answers or being perfect. It's about being willing to admit you don't have all the answers and being open to guidance from something beyond yourself. And for people who might be skeptical about faith in general, Ellen asked. I understand the skepticism, Ozzy replied. I was skeptical too. All I can say is that my life is evidence that transformation is possible. Whether someone attributes that to God, to the universe, to their own inner strength, or to something else entirely, the important thing is that change and healing are real possibilities. As the cameras stopped rolling, Ellen immediately approached Ozzy with a genuine apology. I'm really sorry about how I handled that, she said privately. I let my own biases affect how I treated your beliefs, and that was unprofessional and unkind. No harm done, Ozzy assured her. These are important conversations to have. Sometimes people need to be challenged on their assumptions, including me. You handled that with such grace, Ellen said. I have to admit, you made me think about some things I hadn't considered before. That's all any of us can ask for, Ozzy replied. A willingness to think and grow. When the episode aired, the response was immediate and intense. Clips of the exchange went viral across social media platforms, but unlike many viral moments, the reaction was overwhelmingly thoughtful rather than sensational. Religious leaders from various denominations praised Ozzy's articulate defense of faith, with many noting that his journey from addiction to recovery through spiritual transformation was a powerful testimony to the possibility of redemption. Mr. Osbourne reminded us that God's grace is available to everyone, regardless of their past, wrote Reverend Sarah Johnson of the Methodist Church. His story is proof that no one is beyond the reach of divine love and transformation. Mental health advocates also embraced the interview, using it to highlight the role that spirituality can play in recovery and healing. What we saw was a man who found meaning and purpose through faith, and that faith gave him the strength to overcome addiction and maintain his recovery, noted Dr. Michael Chen, a leading addiction specialist. While faith isn't the only path to recovery, for many people it's a crucial component. The interview also sparked broader conversations about religious tolerance and the importance of respecting others' spiritual journeys, even when they don't align with our own beliefs. However, the response wasn't uniformly positive. Some of Ellen's longtime fans criticized her for what they saw as an unfair ambush of a guest, while others defended her right to ask challenging questions about apparent contradictions in public figures' personas. Ellen has always been someone who asks the tough questions, wrote entertainment blogger Marcus Stevens. Maybe she went too far this time, but isn't it fair to question whether someone's public faith is genuine when their entire career was built on a very different image? This criticism prompted Ozzy to address the broader question of authenticity in a follow-up interview with People magazine. "I understand why people might be skeptical," he said. "I spent decades cultivating an image that seems completely at odds with faith and spirituality. But that's exactly why my transformation is so meaningful to me. It represents a complete change in how I approach life." He explained that his journey to faith hadn't been sudden or convenient, but rather a gradual process that began during his first attempts at sobriety in the 1990s. "I tried to get sober multiple times without any spiritual component, and it never stuck," he revealed. "I had the willpower for a few months, maybe a year, but eventually I'd always go back to drinking and drugs because I hadn't addressed the deeper issues. The pain, the emptiness, the feeling that my life had no real purpose. The turning point," he explained, came during a particularly dark period in 2005, when his addiction had reached life-threatening levels. "Sharon found me unconscious in our bedroom, and the doctors said I was maybe an hour away from death," Ozzy recalled. "When I woke up in the hospital, I knew something had to change fundamentally. Not just my behavior, but my entire worldview." It was during his recovery from that near-death experience that Ozzy first seriously explored spirituality, initially through Alcoholics Anonymous, and its emphasis on surrendering to a higher power. "At first, I was resistant to the God talk in AA," he admitted. "I thought it was just something weak people needed to lean on. But as I listened to other people's stories, people who had found real, lasting change through faith, I began to open my mind to the possibility." His exploration led him to study various religious traditions, but it was Christianity that ultimately resonated with him, particularly the concepts of forgiveness and redemption. The idea that no matter how badly you've messed up, there's always a path back to love and purpose. "That spoke to me on a level nothing else ever had," he explained. Ellen herself referenced the interview in subsequent shows, using it as an example of how important it is to approach others' beliefs with respect and curiosity rather than dismissal. "I learned something that day," she told her audience a week later. "I learned that my job as an interviewer isn't to judge or mock my guests' beliefs. It's to understand them and help my audience understand them too." Ozzy taught me a valuable lesson about grace, both in his faith and in how he responded to my disrespect. The incident also prompted Ellen to reflect more deeply on her own approach to spirituality and meaning-making. In a rare personal interview with Oprah Winfrey 6 months later, she opened up about how the encounter had affected her. "I realized that my discomfort with Ozzy's faith wasn't really about him. It was about my own relationship with spirituality," Ellen admitted. "I've always been someone who finds meaning through making others happy, through spreading joy and positivity. But when I saw how deeply his faith sustained him, especially through his health challenges, it made me question whether I had sources of strength that could sustain me through really difficult times." Ellen revealed that the interview had prompted her to explore meditation and mindfulness practices, and to have deeper conversations with friends and family about what gives life meaning. "Beyond career success and public approval, I don't know if I'll ever have the kind of faith that Ozzy has," she said, "but I have a lot more respect for it now, and I understand why people find it so sustaining." The broader entertainment industry also took notice of the interview's impact. Several talk show hosts began incorporating more thoughtful questions about guests' spiritual journeys and personal philosophies, moving away from purely promotional interviews toward more substantive conversations. The Ellen Ozzy interview showed that audiences are hungry for authentic, meaningful discussions, noted television critic Janet Morrison. "People are tired of surface-level celebrity chatter. They want to understand what really motivates and sustains public figures, especially those who've overcome significant challenges." For Ozzy, the interview became another opportunity to share his message that transformation is possible and that faith can be a powerful force for positive, change in people's lives. He began accepting more speaking engagements at recovery centers and faith-based organizations, sharing his story with people who were struggling with similar issues. That day reminded me why it's important to be open about my beliefs, he said in a later interview. Not to convert anyone, but to show that faith comes in many forms and can reach people in the most unexpected circumstances. If my story helps even one person find hope in their darkest moment, then it was worth any discomfort or mockery I might face. The interview also had a profound impact on Ozzy's family, particularly his children, who had sometimes felt conflicted about their father's public persona versus his private transformation. For years, I felt like I had to defend Dad against people who only saw the wild rock star image, his daughter Kelly said in a family interview. But watching him articulate his faith so clearly and powerfully on Ellen's show, it made me realize that he doesn't need defending. His transformation speaks for itself, his son Jack added. What impressed me most wasn't just that he stood up for his beliefs, but how he did it. He could have gotten angry or defensive, but instead he used it as an opportunity to educate and inspire. That's the dad I know, someone who turns challenges into chances to help others. Sharon Osbourne, who had supported her husband through his darkest periods and his journey to faith, was particularly moved by the public's response to the interview. For so many years, I watched Ozzy struggle with the disconnect between who he was on stage and who he was becoming as a person, she reflected. That interview was the first time I saw him fully integrate those two aspects of himself. He showed that you can honor your artistic legacy while also being completely honest about your spiritual growth. The interview also sparked academic interest, with several universities incorporating it into courses on media ethics, celebrity culture, and the role of spirituality in public discourse. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a professor of communication studies at Stanford University, used the interview as a case study in her course on media representation of religion. What we see in this exchange is a fascinating example of how assumptions about authenticity can clash with genuine personal transformation, Dr. Martinez explained to her students. Ellen's initial skepticism reflects broader cultural assumptions about who is allowed to be spiritual, while Ozzy's response challenges those assumptions in a thoughtful, articulate way. The interview became required viewing in several addiction counseling programs as an example of how public figures can use their platforms to destigmatize both addiction and faith-based recovery. Mr. Osbourne's willingness to be vulnerable about his spiritual journey, combined with his articulate defense of that journey when challenged, provides a powerful model for people in recovery, noted Dr. Patricia Williams, director of the California Institute for Addiction Recovery. 1 year after the interview, Ellen and Ozzy were invited to participate in a panel discussion about faith, media, and public discourse at the University of Southern California. Their conversation, moderated by religious studies professor Dr. James Patterson, drew over 1,000 attendees and was live-streamed to millions more. I think what happened on my show that day was important not just for Ozzy and me, but for how we all think about respecting others' deeply held beliefs, Ellen said during the panel. It reminded me that my platform comes with the responsibility to approach others' spiritual journeys with curiosity and respect, not skepticism and mockery. Ozzy used the opportunity to expand on his thoughts about faith in the public sphere. I think there's sometimes an assumption that public figures, especially entertainers, can't have genuine spiritual lives, he said. But if anything, being in the public eye makes you more aware of your need for something greater than yourself. The pressures, the temptations, the constant scrutiny. You need a source of strength that goes beyond your own willpower. The panel discussion also addressed the broader question of how celebrities can discuss their faith without appearing to proselytize or alienate fans with different beliefs. The key, Ozzy suggested, is to share your experience without insisting that others follow the same path. My faith works for me, but I recognize that other people find meaning and strength in different ways. The goal is to inspire people to find whatever gives their life purpose, not to convert them to a specific belief system. The exchange ultimately served as a powerful reminder that authentic faith isn't diminished by past mistakes or unconventional appearances, and that true grace is shown not just in belief, but in how we respond to those who challenge or dismiss what we hold most dear. Years later, Ellen would often reference that interview as a turning point in her own understanding of faith and spirituality. While she never adopted Ozzy's specific beliefs, she developed a deeper appreciation for the role that faith can play in healing and transformation. Ozzy taught me that day that faith isn't about fitting into a particular mold, she would reflect. It's about finding something that gives your life meaning and helps you become a better person. And who am I to mock or dismiss something that has that kind of positive power in someone's life? The interview also became a touchstone for discussions about media responsibility and the importance of approaching sensitive topics with respect and nuance rather than sensationalism. What happened between Ellen and Ozzy shows us at our best and worst, noted media critic David Chen. Ellen's initial approach represented the cynical, dismissive attitude that often characterizes celebrity interviews. But her willingness to listen, learn, and publicly acknowledge her mistake, combined with Ozzy's gracious but firm response, turned a moment of conflict into an opportunity for genuine understanding and growth. Thank you for reading this powerful story about faith, respect, and the courage to stand up for your beliefs. If it moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. It helps us continue sharing stories that remind us of the importance of treating others' spiritual journeys with dignity and understanding. Thank you for reading this powerful story about faith, respect, and the courage to stand up for your beliefs. If it moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. It helps us continue sharing stories that remind us of the importance of treating others' spiritual journeys with dignity and understanding.